I would want to start by, first of all, letting people know what GIBA is. GIBA is an association of authorized and operational non-state-owned private broadcasting stations formed to promote our membership's common interests. We've been around for some 25 years, and we also actively promote the independence, legal, and economic interest of our members through the provision of top quality research, advisory and consultancy, and advocacy in changing business and regulatory environments. So we know for Ghana, the media has, we opened our doors basically with the coming of the Constitution in 1992. So you would find that a lot of the times we come from a position of fighting, because we've always, in fact, that is what it's been. We're always pushing the boundaries, and luckily our Constitution is what we stand on. I think earlier you did mention, first of all, I want to look at the state of the media that we're in. Ghana has a unique situation. When Abuja, a couple of weeks ago, we had a meeting with Bonn in Nigeria. And it was surprising to see that even we have more stations than they have in Nigeria, if you look at the population size. So that tells us that we actually are in a unique situation, and also for us as practitioners of media. The report that was done by the School of Communications for us was a big break, because what it did for us was, for the first time, we had consolidated issues of media into one document. We'd had so many meetings on different issues all the time, and it was very difficult because we did not have research information. But here, this document has actually pulled everything together, which we think is great. I think some aspects other speakers will take, but for my report, what I'll focus on is the absence, first of all, is the absence of broadcasting legislation, which is the broadcasting bill. And then I would also talk about financial viability. We found out that, and then I would touch on briefly on other topics. We found out that most of the issues also, I think the media ownership part has been taken care of quite in detail, but a lot of stations are struggling currently in this country. The financial viability is completely threatened. Now, when that happens, it makes stations vulnerable, it makes even the staff vulnerable. So let's look at what are the issues that are bringing about some of these challenges. First, I would want to touch on taxation, authorization fees, and business registration. We have, we come from a background where we had a much smaller number of stations. Now we've seen this escalate to a larger number. It has an impact on different things. One, all these stations that have come on board are actually struggling for the same box of advertising revenue. And we've more than increased our number by 100-fold, if I should say. We had numbers, I think Samson did mention the number. For stations, we have 513 stations out of 707 authorizations. Nigeria is hardly scratching about 450 now. And then for television, we also have 121. Now, when I come to taxation, Ghana specifically, we have no special provisions or tax breaks, even though the numbers have increased. There are no tax breaks here. In 2020, I remember during the COVID, for example, the group of the GJA, GIBA, Primpag, and other media, we had a number of engagements. And we asked that the media carried all the government communication throughout COVID. They worked throughout without a break. And we asked that they must give a stimulus package, for example. It never happened. In 2014, there was also a media development fund it was poorly implemented and eventually was brought to a stop. So that also never continued. Now, broadcast owners in the report will tell you that because of the inflow and the struggles of the inflow of cash, they have asked that why doesn't the NCA review the cost of authorization? We've increased the number of stations that much, and we've not seen a decrease in the authorization rates that stations are paying. So what are we saying? NTA, is it possible to reduce this so that the burden on stations would be reduced? The other thing about tax breaks, that basically goes more to the print industry. Imported books get some exemptions on tax, but when you have local literature, there are no exemptions and benefits that are provided. Like all other businesses, media organizations are compelled to do their tax laws. And historically, and the good thing is that we've not had many cases where stations have come into trouble with the GRA. However, there are some cases that came up, and it's important to mention that the influence of such things when they happen. In September 2015, I remember Angel FM was charged with owing the state some taxes. So their offices were sealed off by the GRA. That was resolved. In 2017, I remember NCA, there was another outcry from the broadcast industry on fines. Huge fines were imposed on stations to renew their authorizations, and that was resolved. However, a number of free-to-air stations today, as we speak, are caught up with a new thing, which is they are being asked to pay for free-to-air communication service taxes. Now, Samson, CST is a consumer tax that is supposed to be paid. Now, to transfer this onto broadcasters and insist that some of them pay, and some of them have had letters as far back as 2015 to pay taxes to date. Basically, we're now moving to the point where that could mean that you're actually shutting down that station. Because one, the tax is not a tax that free-to-air stations are supposed to pay by law, but this is actually being enforced. We've done some engagements on this, and some discussions are supposed to follow up between the MOI, the Ministry of Finance, GRA, and GIBA. But these cases tend to reinforce the perception that tax liabilities can be used to intimidate critical media, especially specific news organizations. They started and we've stopped. Now, talking about the increase in pressure for revenue, now that the revenues have been depressed, and they've also been depressed because there are alternative platforms that people are using to disseminate information. We now have online. People are reaching in country to do the same thing, and a lot of the stations have now lost a lot of ground on ad revenue. But this has not stopped, has not enabled a discussion that the stations have had with regulators to look at, especially the financing of stations. The whole game has changed for a lot of stations. Rather, we've had an increase in number of stations. And as I speak, I know stations are even now struggling to even pay their regular licensing. The other big issue, which is also another bill, which comes to another bill that we are also praying that it's looked at and passed, is coming from advertising revenue, which is the main source of revenue for free-to-air stations. Whilst we've seen a reduction in terms of ad spend on radio and TV on the traditional platform, a lot of advertisers have moved to digital. This has also depressed the revenue income of a lot of stations. So there's the need for, we're asking government to pass the bill which brings about, it's called the Advertising Council Bill. This will enable us to regulate the advertising industry. What is happening is, because there's so much competition for adverts, a lot of stations go in for deals, and the advertisers tend to give you a payment period of sometimes 120 days or more. So what happens is that stations actually will run adverts, but there's no cash flow and payment is due in 120 plus days. Now, this has been a rule of thumb because it's just been an open regulation. Nobody actually put it there. But a lot of stations are in so much debt because now when it comes to even the period of payment, this doesn't seem to happen. So as part of it, in other countries, what they've done is they have put in clear regulations on durations, etc., on payments to stations. This we can only achieve if we get also the advertising bill also coming through. Now, so you find we are actually also supporting AAG to pass this so we can bring in these regulations and allow us to increase the revenue of stations. We also are looking at other funding options. We have spoken about public broadcasting in the past, which had to do with TV licensing, which we know now when somebody would say is mundane. Because to collect TV license, you must have serialization, serial numbers of televisions, etc. It is just not practical. We've had discussions. There are other alternatives that should happen, but this has not happened. So these are some of the things in the area of funding that we really would have wished that engagement happened to improve the funding of the stations. I would also want to talk about the process. The process of engagement of the industry with regulators. As I speak, there are a number of problems that were mentioned in the report. The last time I remember where GIBA specifically, as an advocate, got an engagement with the ministry and NCA on an issue which is mainly got to do with digital migration, which touches on the access of people's of people to communication on television. We were expected to have migrated quite a while ago. This has not happened. We've had a number of issues where we had to even go to court to contest because of the introduction of a policy which would actually give control of the platform to third parties. It is important to note that for free to air, it is also supposed to be maintained as such. So with lack of this engagement, all the number of issues that have been mentioned, which have been occurring from time to time, financial viability issues, the reduction of authorization, ownership issues, there actually is no platform where you can engage and speak about these issues that exist. One of the things that we did mention with unless there's an issue that you write, and then you may get called up to come and speak. So with that kind of engagement, we are not able to actually deal with a lot of the issues. Sorry, I think I've got. Hold on.
So you're listening to Cecil Sunkwa-Mills, and you're watching him as he gets towards ending his presentation on our subject for this fifth in the series of the Joy Change Speakers series. So, yes, already have a lot of questions on my mind, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to have the opportunity to ask them. You know, he's dealing with the business side of things, very important.
Yeah, so I speak about lack of industry engagement, okay? And then there's also the absence of a structured periodic sustenance conversation. We have noticed also that in terms of platform management, we do not have a clear policy direction as we speak for DTT migration. There was a policy which came out, and because we went to court, this policy, part of it was quashed. So what it meant was that we expected a new policy to come through from the ministry or the NCA. Now this is pending. But besides that, we've seen that new rates have been sent out for stations to make payments to sit on this platform. Now, the other side of this is that these rates, as we know, we expected that there must be an approval process for these rates to be finalized. This has not happened. Some discussions happened. They were supposed to give us feedback on exactly how they came about with these rates, but this did not happen. Now, this has been followed up with other rates of distribution for some of the people on the DTT platform. Now, this has actually even resulted, as we speak, with some stations being actually taken off the platform for non-payment of fees which have actually not been approved with stations. So there are a number of operational issues, but I think the biggest thing for the industry is that there is no opportunity to do fair engagement. This is not happening. We would only hear of some specific meetings given to selected stations, and we know that the issue with stations and ownership. So you cannot, it is not representative enough. So we're saying that we need to have clear platforms and rules of engagement with the industry. Then we can progress and discuss a lot of these issues. So I've spoken about the financial stuff. Now let's look at working conditions of media. Working conditions, we currently are working together with the GJA, and what we intend to do, especially the first move, is to unionize the journalists. So we put them all in the union, and this is directly to allow specific conditions of service to come into play for journalists across the country. If we look at it, there's a fragmentation on people. Some people may not even have letters of employment. There are no clear conditions of the jobs they do. So this will help to bring together a framework that would improve the working conditions of Ghana the media. But one of the things that we always say is that this is also very dependent on revenue streams and also ownership, which we spoke about earlier. There are a lot of issues mentioned under working conditions, which is like healthcare, counseling services, etc. But those are actually linked a lot with revenue situations. Also, media and regulation. I think the broadcasting bill, which we have been part of, we've actually given a lot of input in there, would have, if passed, helps also to create fairly open access to a lot more people, and also looks at the issue of ownership as mentioned earlier. So it tends to limit in terms of ownership what happens there. So that the other thing is safety of journalists. A framework has also been put in place. We're part of the group with the Ghana Journalism Association, but we need some funding to move that framework further. But there's some progress on that that front. The other proposal for safety of journalists that we've asked is that we have a planned joint structured engagement between the police and the media, and this must take place consistently to enhance cooperation between us and the police.
All right, so your time is up now. If you can just conclude, so we ask you a couple of questions.
So for us, our major drive is that the ownership of platforms should be key. That's who owns platform, and that comes a lot in the broadcasting bill. And control of platform should actually, even though it is written that there's freedom of speech, but when the platforms are controlled by third parties and governmental or state actors in that manner, for example, tends to limit the freedom of speech. The other thing we want is an increased engagement with state players, and then the partners and stakeholders. And we want to see the two bills, which is the broadcasting bill and the advertising bill, passed into law. This will help to consolidate a lot of the things that we need to do.